Good afternoon. This is our webinar today focused on the step-by-step overview of the 2017 performance data form, specifically Module 2 and optional Module 3. Just so that you all know, this webinar is being recorded today. Additionally, if you look at the menu or control panel of your webinar, you'll see that there is a handout, and that's a PDF of the slides that we're going through today that you can download. We have a couple of people that are going to kick off our webinar. I'm going to turn it over shortly to Leon Littau, who's going to talk a little bit on behalf of the OCS staff, as well as Kate Thomas, who will talk on behalf of OCS Liaisons. So, Leon?
Okay, thank you. Yes, greetings also from the Office of Community Services and the Division of Energy Assistance, of which I am located. And we're going to be, again, talking about the LIHEAP Performance Data Form. I think this is the second year that it's required, so a number of you, this is somewhat a repeat because we've not changed any of the items for this form. The instructions may have been, some of them may have been enhanced a little bit to increase their clarity. But with that said, it's an annual report that all state grantees and the District of Columbia are required to submit. The performance data form collects LIHEAP physical information and performance measures data. The form itself consists of 3 LIHEAP data modules. Module 1 is the grantee survey on sources and uses of funds. Module 2 is on the LIHEAP performance measures that are required, and Module 3 is an optional section on optional performance measures. What do we do with the data? They're published in the annual LIHEAP report to Congress. They're published in our LIHEAP performance management website or data warehouse specifically. And we use the data to respond to congressional and White House inquiries. Let me give you an update on where we are with the form, because we cannot require you to fill out the form because we don't have OMB clearance. We're just starting to go through that process, and we'll let you know, not the day before, but we'll give you ample heads up as to when the form will be required to be submitted back to us, completed. Upon approval by OMB, HHS, what I was saying, the ample notice would be literally through an action transmittal, with the final due date and instructions for accessing and submitting the form in the OLDC, which you use for a number of LIHEAP forms from our office. Although grantees cannot currently certify or submit their fiscal year 2017 LIHEAP performance data form in OLDC, grantees are encouraged to prepare information needed for the report. And so, again, just to repeat, there are no changes to the reporting items. And with that, I will turn it back to our hostess.
Thanks, Leon. I'm going to turn it right over to Kate.
Good afternoon, everyone. This is Kate Thomas. I am a regional liaison in the Office of Community Services. I myself serve Regions 3 and 6, but all of the states have a liaison to assist them. There are currently 4 liaisons on staff right now serving all the states that receive LIHEAP, and we assist with providing guidance on program operations, providing resources, clarifying HHS requirements, OLDC access, and many other items. On the screen is a link to your liaison contact information. If you need it for any reason and don't have it at this point, feel free to look up who your liaison is there. And please reach out to any of us anytime. If we can't help you, we can get you in touch with someone or something, some tool or resource that can assist you. And often that is a prize when it comes to these performance measures. So we can work with them to get you the information that you need and getting this information submitted. And as Leon said, the form is not, you can't actually submit the data yet, but you can go ahead and get it entered into OLDC and do everything but certify and submit it. So if you're having any trouble with that process, or you have any questions, feel free to reach out to your liaison or to Apprise. Thanks.
Thank you, Kate. So we're going to jump into this webinar. We have 90 minutes, and we're going to go line by line. And we are focusing today on Module 2, which really looks at performance measures. We have already looked at Module 1, which was the grantee survey portion. And so this is going to go step by step through each line of the report and pay attention to key components. We'll also give a little bit more information on the optional Module 3. As we go through each section, we will have question and answer breaks. But if you have a question and you want to just make sure you get it down, you can use the chat function to go ahead and type it as we're moving along. And Michelle will get it and will either interject or bring it up at the question break. We're going to talk about an overview of Module 2. We'll go through each section. We'll talk about some common reporting questions and issues. We'll then go over an overview of the optional Module 3, and we'll talk about resources available to you. So let's jump into this. When we look at Module 2 from kind of an overarching standpoint, we're really asking you to talk about are the outcomes of your program. We're going to look at the impacts of LIHEAP in terms of how you've reduced home energy burden, how you've restored home energy service, and how you've prevented the loss of home energy service. And so with these three outcomes, Module 2 is broken up into three kind of corresponding sections. Section 5 is all about energy burden targeting. Section 6 is about restoration of home energy service. And Section 7 is about the prevention of loss of home energy service. All three of these sections are required. So once again, we are providing an in-depth discussion, and we've talked in the last few webinars about the reason we need this. We know that every grantee, it's a block grant, so every grantee has a different design to their program, but that doesn't change the fact that OCS has to provide some sort of consistent reporting in terms of the report to Congress or other legislative requests, for example. And so the rules for reporting allow OCS to make these kind of consistent or put together these consistent reports and comparisons, and they're just flexible enough for all of you to be able to report your information. But we'll talk about, when you have exceptions or things that don't quite fit, we'll talk about how to deal with that as we go through the report. There are no changes to the reporting items, as Leon already mentioned, from last year's performance data form. This is important for many of you. The federal fiscal year goes from October 1st through September 30th. And so when we talk about this report, we're talking about reporting on households that received assistance during this time period. Many of you operate your programs on different program years. You start January 1 or July 1. But it's really critical that the data used to complete this module, and really the whole performance data form, is data for the households that received assistance in the federal fiscal year. We're going to jump into Section 5. This is what it looks like. It is a little bit intimidating, but do keep in mind that all the gray squares are auto-calculated. So that makes it a little bit less intimidating to look at. This is kind of this idea of a key concept cheat sheet. So we're going to walk through these concepts, but when we talk about the form and really when we put together the form either ourselves or with our IT staff, these are the key things that we're really focused on. Energy burden, which is a percentage of annual household income spent on home energy costs. Bill payment assisted households, which we talked about earlier in the household report. These are households that were provided with a LIHEAP benefit that's used to pay a share of the household's energy bills or utility deposits. The annual total residential energy bill. And so this is the amount households spent on home energy costs 1 year, and it equals the main heating bill plus the annual electric bill. And when we talk about high burden households in this particular report, we're talking about the 25% of households with the highest energy burden. So of the X number of households that you're reporting received or reporting in the first section of this report, We're going to take the top 25% of that, and we're going to talk about that in some more detail, but these are really some key concepts that we're going to hit on today. It's important to understand why this is important, right? So the LIHEAP statute spells out for us that the LIHEAP provides grants to states to assist low-income households, particularly those of the lowest income, that pay a high proportion of household income for home energy, so that's high energy burden. The second part of the statute also says that the state agrees to provide the highest level of assistance to those households with the highest energy burden, or as the statute says, the lowest income and the highest energy costs or needs in relation to income. So it's not only the intent of the program to really help those with high energy burden, but states actually, when you sign your model plan, are agreeing to target your benefits so that the highest level of assistance also goes to those households. Now, energy, we come back to this all the time, that energy burden is not necessarily this concept that everyone knows about. So just a reminder that it's the percentage of annual household income spent on annual home energy costs. And so we have a calculation here that just kind of spells it out mathematically. Energy burden can vary greatly for LIHEAP households depending on income and energy bills, and we do give some examples later in the presentation. So we talked earlier about how this report is really about measuring or demonstrating the impacts of your LIHEAP program. And so the goal of Section 5 is to understand how LIHEAP benefits impact the energy burden of recipient households. And there's three main things that we're looking at. We're looking at a change in energy burden. So when you make a LIHEAP payment, how much are you reducing household energy burden for the household you're surveying? We're going to look at benefit targeting index. So are you giving higher benefits to those people with higher energy burdens? And then we're going to look at the burden reduction targeting index. And so this really looks at whether high burden households experience higher, lower, or equal reduction in their energy burden. We know that just paying someone more doesn't mean it's going to have the same impact. Paying someone more doesn't mean that you're going to reduce their energy burden more. If they're already starting out with a much higher energy burden, a higher payment may not, just putting a few extra bucks toward them is not necessarily going to reduce it the way you want to. So we're going to look at all three of these in this report. Energy burden targeting is a comparison. Remember when we just talked about the statute that said it's not just our responsibility to serve people with higher energy burdens, but it's our responsibility to target assistance to those people with higher energy burdens. When we look at these indices here in this report, what we're really looking at is comparing how are we impacting average households and how are we impacting high burden households, and how do those compare? And that's what this index is all about. The report starts, this is one of our favorite graphics, because when we talk about the report, we're starting with a universe of households, and that's what Section A is, because we're breaking up this universe into different pieces as we move through the report. So we start with all bill payment assisted households, then we look at bill payment assisted households with available bill data, and then from there we look at the highest burden households among those households in Section B. And so each section, as you move through this report, is a subset. The households in Group B are a subset of the households in Group A. The households in Group C are a subset of the households in Group B. And the whole purpose of our energy burden targeting index is to compare results for the households in Group B to Group C. And this next slide goes into this again, in just a little bit different way, right? Section 5 is divided into three parts. So when you fill out Part A of the form, you're really talking about all bill payment assisted households. Part B, you're going to lose some of those households because you don't have available bill data for everyone. And so it'll be just those households that you have available bill data for. And then Section C will be the highest burden households from Part B. So it really is just taking subsections of the report and breaking it down. going to jump into Part A. This is a one-line. Part A is the LIHEAP bill payment assisted households. This is your kind of your universe you're starting with for this particular part of the form. And you have a little help. I'll get to that in the next slide. So the bill payment assisted households, we talked about this in the household report. Bill payment assisted households are any household provided with a LIHEAP benefit used to pay a share of the household's energy bills or utility deposits. So we're talking about households that are getting heating, cooling, crisis benefits that help to pay the energy bill. We're also including in the bill payment assisted households line households receiving heat and rent payments. We're not including weatherization assistance, energy-related equipment repair replacement, or SNAP households that receive a nominal LIHEAP benefit. This is known as heat and eat in many states. And if you go to the next page, you're going to report on all households that receive bill payment assistance during the fiscal year by main heating fuel type. So this isn't where their benefit was applied necessarily. It's by what they've declared as their main heating fuel type. Households that receive bill payment assistance but have an unknown main heating fuel type should go into the other fuels column. And you'll notice that the yellow, for those of you who can see color, the yellow highlighted cells in this report are the fuel types. And if you enter it by fuel type, the red cell, the all households column, will auto-calculate. So you won't need to calculate the all households line. And you can verify that that all households number is correct by checking your household report, because the all households field in line A of your performance data form should match the bill payment assistance household count reported in your household report in line 6. So this is a key slide. If you have them in front of you, this is one I would highlight or circle or jot down 24 somewhere, because this is a great kind of a validation check for you. So what if households received multiple benefits? How should a household be reported if it received multiple heating benefits during the fiscal year? We're really looking for an unduplicated count of households that receive bill payment assistance. And so let's just go to the next slide. This can get a little confusing, but take some time and take a look at the slide if you're struggling with that idea of what an unduplicated count is. And it's not intuitive, so it's something that not a lot of people get or get quickly. But if you take a look at this, you'll notice that household A got 3 heating benefits and a year-round crisis benefit. Therefore, they're counted once as one household under the bill payment assistance line. You'll notice in household C, for example, they only receive weatherization assistance, so they're not going to be counted in the bill payment assistance line. So we're not looking at the number of times a household got bill payment assistance. We're really looking at whether they got it or not. And so this gives you a nice little breakdown of how you would count that. So now you have Part A. You're going to, from Part A, go to Part B and complete that. And you'll see from this graph that Part B is going to be a subset. So this is where if you have 100,000 households, to start with in line A, you may only have 75,000 or 50,000 households, depending on how many households you have bill data for. And we'll talk about what this available bill data means. For a household to be included, you must have the following information. You need to have their annual household income. You need to have their annual total LIHEAP bill payment assistance benefits. Both of these things you needed for either the grantee survey or the household report. So you should have this data readily available. But you also need their total annual main heating fuel bill and the total annual electricity bill if electricity is not the main heating source. When we talk about where this information comes from, generally item 1, which is the annual household income, would be come in during your client application or intake process. Item 2, the amount of bill payment assistance benefits you're giving them should be documented in your program records or database. Items 3 and 4 would be collected from energy vendors. So the household, this is a lot of information on a slide. The households included in Part B are the subset of households which you successfully collected energy bill data from Part A. And so keep in mind that grantees are only required to collect data from the largest energy vendors, not from all of your energy vendors. And we do have a supplement on this, and there's a link, active link here in the PowerPoint that you have access to that you can go to see how do we know which vendors we need to be targeting for data collection. Bill payment assisted households are those for which the energy bill was successfully maintained. And what this means is that electricity main heat households need the total annual electricity bill, but households that use another main heating source need both the main heating fuel and the electric. Households without these would be excluded from Parts B and C. So if we go to the next slide. This is a question we get a lot. Does the annual energy bill period need to match the fiscal year period? So your utilities may say, okay, we understand you want 12 months of billing information. Does it need to be October 1 to September 30 to match the fiscal year? And the answer is no, it doesn't need to correspond to the federal fiscal year. But it must be for a recent consecutive 12-month period. So you're reporting on households assisted during the federal fiscal year, but when you collect their energy bill or cost data, it may not be for that period of time. Energy vendors vary in how they provide the data. Some vendors may provide one annual total amount for each client. This is particularly true in the case of deliverable fuel vendors where people don't get a delivery once a month for 12 months. They may get 2 deliveries or 3 deliveries over a 12-month period. And so deliverable fuel vendors especially are more likely to provide you an annual total amount for each client. And some vendors may provide 12 monthly bill amounts that you would need to sum. So I'm really in love with this slide because I think it demonstrates really nicely who should be included and excluded. And you'll see here that, at the very top line, you have a natural gas household. You have 12 consecutive months of heating bill data. You have 12 consecutive months of electricity data. You would include the household. But let's say you move to another natural gas customer who has, let's say, electricity from a vendor that you're not collecting data from. You may get their natural gas data, but if you don't have their electric, they would not be included in this particular form. And it goes through a number of different examples here to see, to demonstrate when someone would and wouldn't be included. So when we talk about finishing Section B, we're talking about reporting an unduplicated count of all LIHEAP bill payment assisted households with available data by main heating fuel type. So similar to the prior slide where we talked about the first column being auto-calculated, it's similar here. You're going to go through and you're going on line 1 to report in the main fuel heating types, and the all households field would be auto-calculated for you. So we talk about we've talked about this a few different times, but we're just going to keep going here. The households in Part B are a subset of households from Part A. So once again, you may see a lower number of households, or you most likely would see a lower number of households in Part B than you would in Section A. But one of the analysis, the report or the form doesn't do this, but it's something that you can do internally to kind of just get a good sense of the people that you are assisting with bill payment assistance, what percentage are you actually getting data back for? It's a helpful tool internally to understand the integrity of your data. So as we move down Section B, we're going to move towards things that you're more familiar with reporting. In this case, the average annual income for households in Part B by main heating fuel type. So when you look here at the highlighted line 2, all households that are in line 1, so that full 76,000 households, need to be included in line 2. So what this means is that if you don't have income data for households, you're not going to include them in Section B at all. it also means that those zero-income households need to be included. And so you will want to include zero, and we understand that it's going to sometimes skew the income down, but they need to be included anyway, so that's really important. If you have monthly income data, some of you collect, for example, 30-day income, some of you collect 60 or 90-day income, you need to annualize that income. It'll be important to do that. And you're going to report the gross household income, which is similar to the household report. You're going to report the average annual total LIHEAP benefit per household by main heating fuel type and for all households. So I believe the next slide, if you just want to go to the next slide, covers. When we talk about annual total LIHEAP benefit, we're talking about the bill payment assistance benefit. We're talking about bill payment assistance received by the household during the reporting period that includes heating, cooling, crisis, supplemental, whatever bill payment assistance you gave them. It doesn't include non-bill payment assistance like equipment repair and replacement, nominal benefits, or weatherization. And what's important here is that we know many of you give multiple benefits. So a person can get crisis and regular, crisis supplemental and regular, any kind of combination. And so what you'll need to do before you calculate the average is add together the bill payment assistance benefits each household received. And so this is an example of how you would look at average annual total LIHEAP benefit per household. I'm just going to leave this here and you all can go through this. You're also going to report the average annual main heating fuel bill for households in Part B by main heating fuel type. So when you go through here, for electric main heat households, the electricity bill is the main heating fuel bill and should be reported in this line. So when we go through here, we're looking at 12-month averages across by fuel type. Average main heating fuel bill includes all required customer payments, so monthly service charge, usage charge, and taxes. It may include deposits. What it shouldn't include are optional charges. So some states or some vendors have appliance repair contracts or appliance financing charges, equipment purchases, or other special services. This is not the place to count that. The average main heating fuel bill includes customer payments. As we mentioned before, grantees may select to obtain energy bill data for any recent 12-month period as long as a grantee collects energy bill data for a consecutive 12-month period. The next step is to look at the electricity bill. Remember that we talked about the fact that we're looking at total residential home energy costs. And so when we look at that, we're looking at both the main heating fuel bill and the electric bill. And so line 5 is a place where you're going to report the average electric bill. You'll notice that in line 4, in line 5, in the second column here, it's a 0, and that's why it's also not highlighted. For people whose main heating fuel is electric, you're not going to put anything in the electric column. And for the remainder, you're going to go ahead and put their average annual electric bill. We mentioned just 2 slides ago that the costs that should be included in the electric bill category, the electric bill row, should be the same as we just went over. So things like deposits, customer charges, service fees, but not things like equipment repair costs or financing or other special charges. So this is an issue that we saw last year on the forms. When we go to the all households column, we talked about a few of these being auto-calculated, but for some of the rows, it's something that you all need to calculate yourselves. And because there are different numbers of households within each main fuel type, you can't just do an average across the 5 columns. You need to do a weighted average. And so this slideshow is something you can give to your IT, or these next few slides are something you can give to your IT folks or hang on to yourself as you're moving through and doing these calculations. There are really three ways to do that. You can calculate the averages directly from the household level data in your database. You can use an Excel form that we have that automatically calculates the all household column, or you can calculate weighted averages based on the values reported in the individual fuel types. And so we're going to just kind of walk through some of these, and these are really reference slides. If you have a database and you're doing most databases will calculate an average automatically using all the households included in Part B. And if you contact us, we'll help you build a query or look at your report to make sure that this is calculating correctly. If you're doing this outside of your database, there are a couple ways to do this. Approach number 2 is my favorite, which is the Excel workbook that we have online. And there's a link here right for you. And if you go ahead and punch your numbers into the Excel workbook, it'll automatically calculate those weighted averages for you. I will just tell you that this workbook is also useful for putting your data together prior to putting it into OLDC. So if you're looking for a way to kind of compile your data and then have a sheet of paper in front of you before you go sit down in front of OLDC to enter it, this workbook is particularly useful. And then finally, you can calculate weighted averages. What these do is just account for each fuel type column, including a different number of household. And we've actually given, we actually have some guidance directly on calculations for performance measures. This document is something that when I go out and do TNTA visits, I'll hand this to the IT folks often because it's really helpful and for them building reports and queries. But this tells you exactly how to do weighted averages. You can also just call us and we'll help you walk through it. We can help you do it in Excel or whatever program you're using. Lines 6 through 10 are those gray boxes that we saw at the beginning of the webinar that are auto-calculated by the form. And what they really are doing is taking all this data that we've just talked about, the income, the average benefit, the average main heating fuel cost, and the electric costs. And they're taking all of that information to calculate the impacts that we talked about this form really telling us. And so the first thing that we're going to see is the annual total residential energy bill. And this is defined as the dollar amount that a household spent on energy costs. And in Module 2, this equals the main heating fuel bill plus the electric bill. I do want to note that some of you collect a lot of data and will collect bills for secondary or supplemental fuels. And for the purpose of this form, we're not looking at that. The form automatically calculates the average amount in line 6 of Part B. So if we go to the next section, Section C, this is the one more subset. It's the last subset we're looking at. So in Part B, remember that we're looking at all the households that have a complete set of information. Income, annual LIHEAP benefits, annual main heating fuel costs, annual electric costs. If they have all of that information for 12 months, they are in Section B. Of those households, we're going to pick out the highest burden households for Part C. For the performance data form, high burden has a specific definition. It's the top 25% of households from Part B with the highest calculated energy burden. And remember, on slide 15, we showed you what energy burden is. It's the energy bill over the income times 100. And so if you use that definition or you use that calculation, you calculate the energy burden for all of the households in your form, we will be able to ensure consistent reporting across all grantees. So in order to identify high burden households, we're going to move through multiple steps. Step 1 is you're going to calculate the household's annual total residential energy bill. Now remember, on the form, it's going to look at an average across all those households you entered. But in order to get the highest 25%, you're going to need to, either in your database or in a separate software or tool, you're going to need to calculate each household's annual total residential energy bill. And so this tells you how to do that. And one of the pieces that's important to remember as you're calculating this is not to count your electric twice, right? Electricity main heating fuel bill would be counted in the annual main heating fuel, but the annual electric bill should always be zeroed out. So after the step one, which is calculating their annual total residential energy bill, you're going to calculate their energy burden. So you're going to take their residential energy bill and divide it by the household's annual income. That's going to give you the energy burden for each of your households. This is an important step and one that a lot of developers or IT folks can easily skip over. When you have a zero income household, or in cases where the residential energy bill is larger than the income, you're either going to come up with a divisor error, or you're going to come up with a energy burden that is over 100%. And so what we tell people is that in your code or in your reporting or however you're going to do it, when you after you calculate the energy bill, anyone with an energy bill higher than their income, or those with zero income, should be just automatically set to 100% energy burden. And then you're going to do a sort. So if you, let's say you have all of your households in Excel, you're going to sort them from highest to lowest energy burden, and you're going to draw the top 25% of households with the highest energy burden, regardless of their fuel type. So some folks say, well, we need the top 25% in each fuel type. Nope. You're going to look at all your households, and you're going to take the top 25% off. And so this is my second favorite slide in the in this webinar, because it tells you all the steps on one page. You're going to look at the annual total residential energy bill. You're going to calculate that. Let's say you're doing this in Excel. You're going to calculate that in your spreadsheet. You're going to calculate the energy burden next. You're going to go in and check and make sure that anyone that had a zero income or anyone with an income that is lower than their energy bill, you're going to make sure those are set to 100%. You're going to then sort by energy burden, and then you're going to take off the top 25%. And those 25% are the households that you're going to report on in Part C. And when you get those households chosen, you're going to just follow the same steps you did in Part B. The only difference is going to be that it's a smaller set of households. It's only 25%. So, but everything else is going to be the same. Part D. So Part D is auto-calculated, but it is important to understand what it is you're looking at when you're looking at it, because if something seems off to you, you need to be able to go back into your data and figure out what exactly is off. The Benefit Targeting Index looks at how LIHEAP benefits are targeted to high-burden households compared to all households. So when you get a score less than 100%, or 100, not percent, just 100, the average benefit amount provided to high-burden households is less than the benefit amount provided to all households. When you get a 100, it means that the average benefit amount provided to high-burden households is equal to the benefit provided to all households. And when you get greater, it means that you're giving more benefits, higher benefits, to high-burden households than average households. And next to the Burden Reduction Targeting Index. Once again, we're at the same thing where we're looking at 100 is equal, less than 100 is less, greater than 100 is more, but we're looking at how energy burden is reduced in this case. And so when you get to 100, the average reduction in energy burden for high burden households is equal to the average reduction in energy burden for all households. And so many of you might be looking at your data from last year, and you'll see that you paid a person higher benefits, but when you get to the Burden Reduction Targeting Index, you're going to find that you actually reduce less burden for high burden households. So we moved through that very quickly. Are there questions on Section 5? And Michelle's going to walk us through this.
Hey everyone, this is Michelle from Apprise. Just to remind everyone on the call right now, in order to ask a question, you can either type in your question and then I'll receive it, and during these question breaks, I'll read it out to the group and get it answered, or you can feel free to raise your hand, and again, during the question breaks, I will unmute you, so you'll be able to ask your question to the group and we'll also get your question answered. So Melissa, we do have a few typed in questions. And the first question we have is, what is considered as a recent bill period if you're trying to report a household with 12 months of bill data?
Does it say who asked that?
Yes, Lorraine Fortis.
Of course. Hi, Lorraine. I don't have a good answer for this. I'm just going to be really honest. I think that, Dan, I don't know if you want to chime in. I think that there's some discretion here in terms of defining recent. Is that what you would say?
Yes, I think ideally when you're reaching out to your vendors, you would try to get the annual amount to correspond as closely as possible. But some vendors may say we can do it for this period to that period, and it's a few months different, and that's fine. But you shouldn't be collecting data that's several years old or anything along those lines.
I think, Lorraine, the best advice I could give is that if you have a question about it, or if you have something but you're not sure if it's recent enough, to give us a call and we can walk through that with you. Do we have other questions, Michelle?
No, it looks like that was it for now.
Okay. So I just want to say before we move on that we're giving, if you're like me, listening to this is really tough, and it takes getting into it and actually getting your hands on it before you start to really have questions or understand it. And so I just would encourage you all to give us a call and ask questions as you stumble across some of these, and feel free to obviously go back and reference these slides as you're moving through putting together your report. I think it'll be helpful. So Section 6, Restoration of Home Energy Service. So remember, we talked about at the beginning of the webinar that we're not just looking at how our LIHEAP benefits reduce energy burden, but we're also looking at how they impact both restoring home energy service that's been lost, as well as preventing loss of home energy service in the first place. And so Section 6 looks at restoration. The data fields in Section 6 require information on the number of occurrences in which LIHEAP assistance led to the restoration of a household's energy service during the fiscal year. So we're talking about energy service restored after disconnection, fuel delivered to a home that has run out of fuel, or repair or replacement of inoperable home energy equipment. I think it's important here to point out a couple of things. This is not an unduplicated count. So we know that households will come in and they may have a shutoff notice when you give them a regular payment, and they may have a shutoff notice when you give them a crisis payment. They may have a shutoff notice with both their electric and natural gas, and you give them a benefit in both, a crisis or regular benefit in both fields, and in which case those would be counted twice. And that's what we want to see here. We're not looking at unduplicated households. We're looking at the number of times a payment restored home energy. So just like before, we're talking about doing the actual reporting in the main heating fuel, or in the heating fuel columns, and not in the all occurrences column. And so this is another caveat that makes this different from the above section. In fact, a lot of people think, okay, we're going to be working with the universe of households that got bill payment assistance. We're going to be working with the universe of households that got 12 months of bill data, and all of those things that applied to the previous section don't apply here. We're talking about looking at different households, and we're talking about occurrences and not unduplicated counts. It should include all LIHEAP households for which LIHEAP assistance led to a restoration of home energy service during the fiscal year. Once again, as I just said, it may differ from the sample you used in your energy burden section. So restoration measures include all LIHEAP households bill payment assistance, plus weatherization, plus equipment repair and replacement that may be done either through weatherization or through your crisis equipment repair and replacement program. It's also important to know that for some of you, you may only be reporting crisis here because anyone that has a disconnect notice or is already disconnected automatically gets a crisis benefit, but that's not true in all states. In many states, a regular payment can be used to mitigate a crisis. And so your restoration data may reflect both crisis assistance and regular assistance, and it's important to keep that in mind. We talked earlier about this is not unduplicated households, this is the number of occurrences, and we're looking at the number of occurrences where LIHEAP assistance led to restoration after a disconnection. You'll notice that I slipped at the beginning of this and said you'll want to look at the main heating source column, but that's not how we're reporting it this time, whereas Section 5 looked at where the client's main heating source is. We're looking at just the opposite here. We're looking at where the fuel source, where the LIHEAP benefit was applied, regardless of their main heating fuel source. Households could have experienced multiple instances in which LIHEAP assistance was used to restore, and we'd count each occurrence separately. So once again, that gets back to that. This is not an unduplicated count. We're counting occurrences. For those of you who have prepay clients, we're going to look at including electric prepay clients whose account ran out of funds and who had their energy service restored with the LIHEAP benefits. And if it's applicable, or if this is applicable, you might include a note. So in some cases, some of you may wait until prepay is out, for example, and you may not classify this as a crisis, but based on the definition used for restoration, we are saying that if a prepay client whose account has run out of funds and you use LIHEAP to give them more funds, that these would be counted in this section. Line 2 is about delivered fuels. So you're going to report on the number of occurrences where LIHEAP assistance resulted in the delivery of fuel after the household had run out. Once again, you're going to base it on the fuel source where the LIHEAP benefit was applied. So a household that may have natural gas main heat, you may have given them a wood benefit, for example, in order to restore heat to the home. Maybe their furnace was broken and they couldn't get it fixed right away. I mean, there are a million reasons why we give emergency benefits to people outside of their main heating fuel source. And so it's important to keep that in mind here, that we're looking at the fuel source where the LIHEAP benefit was applied. Once again, we're looking at occurrences, not unduplicated households. And the final line 3 of this section looks at the number of occurrences in which households had inoperable heating or cooling equipment repaired or replaced using LIHEAP funds. So once again, this is based on the fuel source for the equipment that was repaired or replaced. So we're talking about a natural gas furnace, for example. An electric could be either air conditioner or perhaps something heating related. And then you could also have wood stoves, for example, would be under wood. So this is based on the fuel source for the equipment that was repaired or replaced, not on their main heating fuel source. I don't think this is very frequent, but some households could have experienced multiple instances where LIHEAP assistance was used to restore or replace their inoperable equipment. This might be someone who has two heating sources, or fixed one but realized they needed to fix different. I mean, I'm not sure where these cases come in, but I'm sure there are these cases. And once again, you would include each occurrence separately. Inoperable equipment includes red-tagged energy equipment. So this is basically any time you have a furnace that you may be able to flip on, but that will be dangerous to the health and safety of a household, it should be counted as inoperable. Grantees with equipment repair and replacement programs that include replacing inoperable equipment should report information here. So this gets to that idea. I talked with a state this morning who, and many states are in this case, where you do some equipment repair and replacement through your energy assistance network, for example, as crisis, and then your weatherization department may also do some equipment repair and replacement as part of perhaps whole home measures or another program. You really need to be counting LIHEAP dollars, whether it be weatherization or from your crisis program. It doesn't matter which component. And so obtaining this data may require, and compiling it may require some coordination with your weatherization partners. And this is somewhere a prize can help. So give us a call if you're struggling to get this data from your weatherization folks or figuring out what that might look like. We've helped a few states do that. We're happy to help you as well. Prevention of loss of home energy service. This is section 7. And the lines look kind of the same. So we're looking at occurrences again, and we're looking at places where LIHEAP prevented the loss of home energy service for a household at imminent risk of losing their home energy during the federal fiscal year. And so this includes households with a utility past due or disconnect notice, households with a limited amount of fuel, or households in need of equipment repair and replacement. Unlike the whole inoperable thing, which is kind of defined automatically, there is some flexibility that grantees have for defining criteria for being at risk. And we'll talk about that a little as we move through this. Unlike Section 5, once again, this is not an unduplicated count. You may have had the loss of energy service prevented more than once in a year, and they would be counted more than once in this section. Just like above, you're going to see that you report the numbers in kind of where this green box is in the energy source where the LIHEAP benefit was applied, and the all occurrences column will be auto-calculated for you. So this gets back to who you include in the sample, and it's really the same as the previous section, Section 6, where you're including all LIHEAP households where LIHEAP assistance prevented loss of home energy service. So, Section 5 only included households who received bill payment assistance, but this section includes all LIHEAP households, including weatherization or equipment repair and replacement households. And once again, the prevention data isn't always just going to be your crisis section or your crisis component. You're going to be looking at perhaps your weatherization as well as your regular heating or cooling benefits, because oftentimes they're used to help a household that has a past due or a disconnect notice on their utility bill. So when we talk about the first line, we're looking at utilities, so natural gas and electric. And for this, we do give you a pretty clear definition of what we think imminent risk looks like. So we're talking about the number of households or the number of occurrences in which households that had a past due or disconnect notice at the time of application and receipt of LIHEAP assistance resulted in continuance of home energy. And that's a long way of saying, if a person walked in with a past due notice or a shutoff notice, did LIHEAP prevent them from getting shut off? You're going to talk about the number of occurrences based on the fuel source where the LIHEAP benefit was applied, not the main heating fuel, but where the benefit was applied. And in some cases, as we talked about before, that could be in 2 fuel types. So one household could walk in on the same day and get a benefit to prevent a shutoff with their electric and a shutoff with their natural gas, in which case they'd be counted once in each column. This will also happen throughout the year. So I would argue that in many cases, people walk in with past due or shut-off notices, and they may get a regular payment, and they may get a supplemental, or they may get multiple crisis payments. You're going to count each occurrence of a time that LIHEAP prevented home energy loss, not households. You're going to exclude households who had been disconnected by the time that they received the LIHEAP benefit. They'd obviously be counted in the prior section. If they're already disconnected, you're restoring their home energy, they should be counted in section 6. You'll include electric prepay households whose accounts were low on funds and who received a LIHEAP benefit that prevented the loss of their energy service. This is something that you're going to need to use discretion on as a grantee, what quote-unquote low on funds means. We'll talk about this in the delivered fuel section next. Many folks say if you are, at 25% of your tank or less, we're going to consider you at imminent risk, and we'll consider a LIHEAP payment preventing home energy loss. Well, similarly, grantees that are dealing with prepay would need to set an amount or some kind of criteria that would say if a person has this much left on their prepay account, we're going to consider them at risk and we'll count them in this prevention category. Line 2 is the delivered fuel section of this, just like in section 6, kind of the same sets of households here, except we're looking at this time at imminent risk of running out of fuel at the time of application. You're going to report the number of occurrences based on the fuel source where the LIHEAP benefit was applied. Households could have experienced multiple instances throughout the year, and each of these should be counted. And you're going to exclude households who had already run out of fuel by the time they received the LIHEAP benefit. Once again, imminent risk is to be defined by the grantee. There is a supplement. I think we're going to give links at the end of this, but if not, they're on the Performance Data Warehouse, where we've gone through a data collection guide and given you lots of supplements. And there's one whole supplement on imminent risk and defining imminent risk. And so you may want to go take a look at that if that's something that you're struggling with, or give us a call. And then the third line looks at repair and replacement of operable home energy equipment. And, we've been training on this for some time, and I would say this is probably the one area of the form that we see a lot of people struggle with, because it's difficult to define when an equipment repair and replacement is preventive. And different grantees use different criteria, but we're looking at occurrences during the fiscal year in which households had operable equipment, but it was failing to a point that repair or replacement resulted in prevention of home energy loss. When we report these, similar rules, right? We're going to report it based on the fuel source for the equipment that was repaired or replaced. People, in this case, because we're looking still at operable equipment, people may have had multiple repairs over the year, and you'll want to count each of those. We want to exclude repairs and replacements of red-tagged energy equipment because, as we mentioned in the earlier section, red-tagged is considered inoperable. So those would be counted in the restoration section. Grantees with equipment repair and replacement programs that include repairing operable but failing equipment should report their information here, and this might mean working with the weatherization folks to get a complete picture of how all of your LIHEAP funds are used for this purpose. Just to give some examples, some states, I think about Wyoming, who actually, I'm not sure if they're on the call, but they have a very detailed list of furnaces that, if you go out based on their year and their make and model, and are considered at risk because of their age or experience with failure or mechanical failures or whatever it might be, but they actually have a list that their weatherization and energy assistance crews can use to determine whether or not a repair of that particular furnace equals preventing home energy loss. In other places, the criteria may not be quite as clear, but I've heard everything from it's clearly on its last leg. It won't last another year based on, whoever does the initial inspection thinks it won't last another year. Those kinds of criteria. And you can look at that in the supplement that I mentioned, or you can give a prize a call and we can help you define that. Are there questions for section 6 or 7?
We do have one question, Melissa, and this is more about filling out the form itself. So the question is, although grantees cannot currently certify or submit their fiscal year 2017 report in OLDC, does this mean that we can, should, or should not start entering our data into OLDC?
First, the answer is yes, you can start entering your data. As a prior coordinator, I, Melissa Torgerson, am going to recommend that if you have the data available and you can begin entering it, it's always good to get a head start. That way, if you come across issues, you can deal with them. And so I'll let OCS chime in as well in terms of whether they recommend it or not, but I think it's always a good idea to start as early as you can with getting your data into your reports. How's that? Kate, would you chime in? Or Leon?
Yes, sooner is better, generally speaking.
Okay. But I can say that you can go in and enter the data, so it's available if that's something you'd like to do.
Yes, Melissa, this is Kate. I would definitely encourage you to go ahead and take advantage of the form being available, and you can save it. You just can't certify and submit it yet. And like I said before, if you, if you think your data is accurate and you're ready to push submit, even though you just can't just yet, reach out to us or Apprise, and maybe we can go ahead and take a look at your data, get a head start on reviewing it, and let you know if there's any issues.
Okay, and that looks like all we have for now, Melissa.
Okay, great. So we're going to the next section. You'll all notice that there's an optional Module 3. So if you go to the next slide, this data was really included in the form because when the performance measures implementation work group was kind of making recommendations to OCS, they said there's some of this data that we think is really important that would be really useful to grantees, not necessarily required, but making sure there's a place for them to enter it and use it if they want it. And so it really is designed to help grantees with analyzing and interpreting the data that you are required to report. And so the few things that are in there are average annual energy usage. And so this gets at consumption. And many of you, as you've gone out to negotiate data exchanges with your vendors, have agreements that you will not only get cost data, but you will also get consumption data. And so this would be the place that you would enter that. It gives you a framework for entering and using that data. Number of households using supplemental heating and air conditioning. Some of you, particularly in cooling states, as well as states like Alaska, where a lot of supplemental heating resources are used, we're really interested in looking how that impacts energy burden and energy costs. And so that information is, there's a place for that information in the optional module. And the last two are unduplicated counts of restoration and prevention. So the same data that we just went through, only instead of counting the number of occurrences, you're looking at the unduplicated counts, household counts. And that can provide just a different set of information for you to use as you're looking at how to target your programs. Or if a legislator calls in and is interested in finding out of the number of households you served, how many of them were coming in really in a crisis situation, either at imminent risk or already disconnected, you have a more accurate figure to be able to kind of look at your program with. And so when I say accurate, I mean occurrences are really important. That's why we included it on the main part of the form. But this is also a valuable piece of information depending on the questions that you're wanting to answer. In 2016, 13 grantees voluntarily reported data. We do have the 2016 instruction link here. There's some limited information on how to put this data or enter this data in the form. I will say that as we work with grantees who are moving on to this optional data, we're answering more questions and we're working on getting more guidance put together based on the questions that we're hearing from grantees. So I'd encourage you, if you have this data, and many of you do, to attempt to enter it either at the reporting period or you can enter it later. And as you have questions, let us know, because we'll take those questions. Not only will we help you answer them, but they'll help us put together resources for all grantees. So some final reminders. We've said this on all of the previous reporting webinars, but notes are really, really important. They help to explain or clarify program features that are unique to your program that may not have allowed you to fit things exactly in the fields that you wanted to. They'll also reduce follow-up from a prize. So if you're uncertain, go ahead and add a note. And there's a really nice example here for you to read through to talk about why certain numbers showed up the way they did in prevention and restoration data. I can't underscore enough the use of these check before you submit documents. They're new this year. A prize put them together for each of the federally required reports. They allow grantees to review all the checks that kind of a prize goes through when they review your report. Some of them will be in OLDC, but many of them are things that will keep you from getting follow-up calls from a prize. And they'll also help you to address issues that you may have run into in previous years. So really encourage you to use these documents. They're all available online and the link is here. If you have suggestions, this is our first year, so if you have suggestions on how these could be improved or what might help you so that these are more usable, I'd encourage you to get a hold of us. As Leon mentioned, this form is currently undergoing approval by OMB, and as soon as it is approved, HHS will publish an action transmittal with a final due date and instructions for submitting the form in OLDC. Keep in mind that nothing has changed since 2016, and the 2016 instructions are available on the website. We've included a link earlier in the webinar. We just talked about the sooner the better, and part of the reason for that is that OLDC is a multi-step process. The data has to be entered, has to be saved, any warnings or errors need to be addressed, it has to be certified and then submitted. And so although it's not due, taking some of these steps prior to when it becomes due will potentially save you time. So there are resources. As we mentioned, the action transmittal and form instructions will be coming soon. The check before you submit document is available at this link, and I'd highly encourage you use it. The LIHEAP Performance Measures Data Collection Guide documents. This is the resource I was talking about earlier, where there are several supplements, including things like how do you define imminent risk, how do you look at restoration, which vendors should I be targeting for data collection. All of those pieces, including a main kind of basic guide on the kind of data you should be collecting, is available. And we've worked on that resource for several years and refined it and honed it in as we work with grantees. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that. And there are additional performance management resources available through the LIHEAP Virtual Library that you can go find. This slide provides OLDC help resources. You know that Grant Solutions is the provider of support through OLDC, and you can log in there. You can log in there to enter your data, and then you can also contact the help desk at either this number or the link. And I will say that I think I've mentioned this in previous calls, that there are extended hours for people on the West Coast. Ms. Kate talked about the OCS Liaisons link, so if you aren't sure who your liaison is, this is a great place to find out. We've repeated the help desk resource for OLDC, and then we've also provided information for the Apprise team. Dan, Jorge, and Michelle are all on the East Coast, and I'm on the West Coast, and you're welcome to get a hold of us at any time as you have questions. You don't need to save up your questions, and they don't need to be fancy. As you run into snags or you're not quite sure how to enter a particular field, give us a call or shoot us an email, and we'll make sure that your questions get answered. We will have a second webinar, just as we've done with all of the other reports. It'll be a 30-minute webinar where we go through just high-level things to consider before you submit your report, common issues that we see in the report that you should make sure you've addressed. We'll also provide a quick refresher of the main reporting requirements and nuances for Module 2, since it's a relatively new reporting requirement, and we'll review the new check before you submit document. Are there questions? I just want to reiterate, we went through especially Section 5 particularly quickly, and so some of you are going to want to go back and review that, and as you do that you may have questions, and really don't hesitate to give us a call to ask us if you'd like us to go through a slide again or any particular information. We are always happy to do that.
Yeah, right now, Melissa, it doesn't look like we have any additional questions. Okay, great. So we look forward to hearing from some of you as you do have questions, and I hope you all have a great rest of the week. Thank you for joining us today.